Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Monster of the Week. Normally on this show, we talk about creatures from the sprawling history of Dungeons & Dragons, but today, we're taking a glimpse into the game's future. As I'm sure most of you are aware, there's a new Monster Manual coming in February that is promising to overhaul the standard 5e bestiary with a fresh take on some old favorites, a few new creatures, and a ton of brand new artwork. And I just so happen to have a preview copy of the book, which I can't really say too much about right now. I know, what a tease. But the folks at Wizards of the Coast did give me permission to share 2 brand new stat blocks with all of you, and I am very excited to do so. Now before we get into it, I was not paid to make this video, I was not given any kind of a script or anything like that. All the stuff I'm going to talk about today is literally just my opinion on the preview material which I was given, and I promise that this is in no way going to devolve into some sort of used car salesman-esque pitch to go buy the new Monster Manual in February.
If you think you're gonna find a bargain at Big Bill, you can kiss my ass!
I am planning a video for the near future where I'm going to get more into the book as a whole, the things I like, the things I don't, all that stuff, but part of getting these previews means there are embargo dates on information and reviews, which is all just to say, rest assured that those videos will be coming as soon as I'm allowed to post them. But for today, I hope that you're ready to nerd out with me as we take the first look at a really cool update to a classic monster, the Cyclops. The Cyclops is one of those rare mythological creatures that has achieved such a high level of mainstream appeal that basically everyone knows what they are. Your non-tabletop fantasy brain friends and family probably won't know what a beholder or mind flayer is despite their notoriety among nerds, but everyone and their three-headed dog knows what a Cyclops is, at least somewhat. When asked, most people will probably say something like, oh, they're the big one-eyed guys, right? And like, yes, that is legally true, but the actual history of the Cyclops, what their origins are, and what kind of things they did are extremely hard to pin down because there are just a ton of incongruous, conflicting stories about them, both in terms of the real-world Greek mythology from which they come, and within their in-game Dungeons & Dragons mythology, which I think is kind of fun. Cyclops have been present for every edition of D&D since the very beginning, and they have undergone a pretty big change to their lore in each version of the game. In 3rd edition, for example, they aren't even in one of the monster manuals, instead they show up in Deities and Demigods under the Olympian Pantheon section, where the book is basically like, yup, you know what a Cyclops is? Here's a stat block. In 4th edition, they aren't even giants, and instead get rebranded as Fae, who are in league with the Fomorians. They also get some cool head spikes, so that's fun. And I straight up don't even have time to get into their muddled past when it comes to 1st and 2nd edition. It wasn't actually until 5th edition that they were printed in the basic Monster Manual and given straightforward stats, which is so weird given how much of a staple in fantasy the Cyclops is. But while they finally did make it into one of the core books at the launch of a brand new edition, the actual stat blocks here leave something to be desired. One of the biggest criticisms levied against giants in 5th edition, which I happen to agree with, is that they don't really do much other than swing with a weapon and throw big rocks. And when we look at the Cyclops from the 2014 Monster Manual, look at that. They swing with a big weapon and they throw big rocks. But wait, they have a trait that could be something interesting or cool, right? Yeah, in addition to swinging a club and throwing a rock, let's give the Cyclops poor depth perception, so they have disadvantage on targets further than 30 feet away. Okay, cool. I mean, that is kind of funny, but this has got to be one of the least interesting stat blocks in the entire Monster Manual, even among giant kind, and that's saying something. It doesn't help that most of their baseline lore is just like business as usual. They dislike religion, they're unsophisticated, easily tricked, and they herd sheep. That's all, like, fine. It's not particularly interesting, but hey, it gets the job done. But thankfully, now we have the 2024 stats and lore, which are here to save the day. Right? Please, God, give them something to do other than throwing a rock. Let's actually take a look and check out what the Cyclops is bringing to the table in 2025. Cyclops, monocular servants of destiny. All right, new Monster Manual, I see you. That actually sounds like it might be kind of interesting. Aside from the monster name and the little subheader here, the first thing I noticed about this page is the fantastic new artwork. It's extremely cool, dynamic, and for as much as we've been hearing about all the new art that's going to be in this book for the past couple years now, it's really awesome to finally see what the hype was all about. But hold on a tick. Who's that lurking in the background? A second Cyclops? Doing something that isn't throwing a rock? Color me intrigued. But we'll get to them in a minute. Reading from the top, after the monster's name and this little bit of flavor text, we get a list of habitats for the monster and what type of treasure they carry, which, if you've been keeping up with the new rules updates, is relevant to the treasure tables in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, so that's cool. The new lore entry for the Cyclops is honestly a little bit on the slim side, but this is meant to work in conjunction with what we already have in 5th edition, so as long as what they include here is not just more of the same, I'm a happy guy. Let's give it a read. Cyclops are gigantic, one-eyed descendants of the gods. Using their mystical vision, Cyclops can witness how future events are likely to occur. Okay, cool. This is exactly the kind of stuff I love to see. They're not just big dumb giants, they're big dumb giants with limited divination abilities. Neat. And then after this initial paragraph, we have 2 little blurbs for each of the 2 types of Cyclops that are presented in this book. First off, it addresses the mysterious magic man in the artwork with a little blurb about the Cyclops Oracle. Cyclops oracles gaze through history to learn hidden truths. Many share these secrets with those who aid them in correcting the mistakes of the past. Now at this point, I'm starting to get excited. As someone who is a sucker for both prophetic tropes in tabletop games and fantasy at large, as well as Greek mythology, this is starting to sound pretty cool. I'm locked in. The next paragraph then goes on to talk about the Cyclops Sentry, who is basically just kind of your baseline Cyclops and serves as the updated version of the original stat block. Most Cyclops Sentries serve their divine progenitors and oppose those who would tamper with fate. And thus the tradition of Cyclops lore directly contradicting that which came before it remains intact. Do they hate religion and think worshipping deities is a waste of time, or do they serve the gods who created them? Neither? Both? Yes? I don't know if including something that was directly contradictory to something in the 2014 Monster Manual was intentional or not, but it's giving Greek mythology. It's giving what a Cyclops is. A question, the answer to which, apparently, nobody actually knows. But either way, I'm down to clown. Let's see what these stat blocks actually have to offer. Starting with the Sentry, it looks like they get to make 2 attacks. Let's see what they get to attack with. Yup, that's gonna be a Great Club and a Rock. But wait, the Great Club knocks huge or smaller creatures prone now, and they can attack with a combination of rock and club attacks instead of one or the other? Okay, that's something, and after all, the Cyclops is sort of a big bruiser. See, the problem was never that they attack with a Great Club and a rock. That makes sense. The problem was that attacking with a Great Club and a rock, as per the mechanics, is really boring and basically just equates to outputting a decent amount of damage, and that's it. Potentially getting knocked prone every time this Cyclops hits you isn't some mind-blowing thing, but it is something on top of just taking a bit of damage. And we love to see that. And this is actually a lot more scary now, because if they hit you once, knock you on your butt, and then attack again, that second attack is now with advantage, baby. And if there are multiple Cyclops around, all knocking you prone with each swing, woof. But that's not all. They also have a brand new reaction, which plays into the idea that they have this gift of foresight. As a reaction, on a recharge of 6, they can force an attack being made against them to be rolled at disadvantage, and then they get advantage on any attacks they make against the target on the next turn. That's absolutely brutal, but it also just feels cool. So now you're not just fighting a big bag of hit points that hits like a truck, you're fighting a lumbering giant who can predict your every move, whose attacks are so imposing you struggle to stay on your feet, that hits like a truck. But if that's just our basic one-eyed Jamook stat block for the Cyclops, what does the Oracle have to say? Well, before we even get into it, I'm just gonna say, this stat block is sick. And I love it. The Oracle is pulling no punches at a CR of 10. They've got comparable stats to the Sentry, however their intelligence and wisdom both get a massive bump, which is great. They also have expertise in both history and perception, meaning their passive perception is 22. Crazy. They get true sight out to 30 feet, which is extremely flavorful for an Oracle, and also just mad useful. And in terms of actions, they replace the club and rock attacks with Radiant Strike and Flash of Light, a melee and ranged attack that do respectable amounts of radiant damage, and of course, they've got some spells. Their spells, however, are entirely non-combat spells, which I think is kind of cool actually. Twice per day they get Arcane Eye, Detect Magic, and Locate Object, all very on brand. But the most exciting spell they have access to is the sole member of their once per day list, a favorite spell of mine, that being Legend Lore. For those who don't know, Legend Lore is the absolute sauce, especially for dungeon masters who like world building or giving their players the chance to learn things relevant to the game. Basically, this spell allows the one casting it to describe a famous person, place, or object. Then the DM just straight up describes that thing to you and gives you a brief summary of what there is to know about the thing in question. As per the spell, this lore might consist of important details, amusing revelations, or even secret lore that has never been widely known. This information is often couched in figurative language or poetry, so sometimes it reads more like a prophecy or riddle than anything direct, and I love that. It's more or less a chance for the players to learn something that can be as plot relevant and specific or esoteric and obfuscated as you want it to be, and legitimately is one of the best tools in the DM toolbox as far as I'm concerned. Also, as per the 2024 version of the spell, if you ask a question about something that is not actually famous, you get entirely dunked on by the magical forces of the universe. The final line of Legend Lore is, and I quote, "If the famous thing you choose isn't actually famous, you hear sad musical notes played on a trombone, and the spell fails." This additional line is the only thing that's changed about this spell between versions, and I only noticed it because I was looking up the text of the spell for this video. That is so funny. Also, I guess trombones are canonically a thing in the Forgotten Realms, so add it to the wiki. Reading this immediately brings to mind the image of a wizard, because you just know there's a wizard who's done this, that cast Legend Lore about themselves to see if they would receive a response, only to be greeted with the sad trombone. And that just reads as the D&D equivalent of Googling yourself only to get hit with that devastating no results found screen. Anyways, the spell is level 5 and normally costs 250 gold worth of incense, so it's not easy to access or even cast for that matter. I mean, even a wizard isn't going to be able to learn it until 9th level. So having this spell attached to a cool monster with oracular abilities that the players can talk to who might be able to provide them with a cryptic fortune telling is extremely dope. Also, they still have that foresight reaction like the Sentry does, but instead of it being limited foresight, they have Portent, which recharges on a 4 to 6, and whenever they or an ally makes a d20 roll, they can roll a d20 and choose which dice is used, the original roll or the one they just rolled, which again is thematically really cool and also mechanically very powerful. That would be like the party's diviner getting to use their signature ability on a recharge. A crazy thing. All in all, I am really happy with these two stat blocks and the small update to Cyclopean lore that we got. Like I said, it would be cool if there was a little bit more here in terms of lore and stuff like that, but I get that they're just trying to fit as many stat blocks as possible into this book, which ultimately means you do have to make some sacrifices. I'm just a big lore nerd, so that stuff always appeals to me. And I hope in the future we get more books like Volo's Guide and other things like that that really just kind of get into the weeds about the ecology and history of some of these monsters. But that said, what we do have here is really great. And as I was reading it, I immediately started coming up with ideas for how I would want to use this monster in an encounter or as part of a major plot point in a campaign. And ultimately, that is the sign of a good monster, because any monster entry in a monster manual should make you start thinking about this stuff as you're reading it. So I count that as a mark of success. And speaking of which, let's talk about how we could actually use these monsters in the game. So I'm thinking about running a game in my favorite setting, Theros, where the party sets out with the intent of returning home from war on an odyssey that ends up taking, oh, I don't know, let's say 10 years. Also, one of them is the king and they have 600 soldiers with them. And I can't help but think, perhaps a random encounter with a Cyclops along the way is called for. Unrelated, but did you know that you can just rip off famous fantasy stories and everyone will think you're a great DM? It's easy. But jokes aside, going back to some of the oldest myths and legends about the Cyclops can be a great way to draw a few points of inspiration into how you might use a creature like this at the game table. Arguably, the most famous Cyclops of all time appears in the Odyssey. Everyone's favorite sheep-collecting giant, Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon. After an altercation involving his favorite sheep, some poisoned wine, and a bunch of dudes getting eaten, the Cyclops is blinded by Odysseus, and the party escapes their encounter with the giant, less a few hirelings. All that just to say, having a random encounter with a Cyclopean shepherd could be really interesting. If everything goes smoothly, maybe they just hang out with their new giant bro and then go about their business. However, if they mess with the giant's flock, or the giant even just thinks they're messing with his flock, hopefully they can run fast. I also love the idea of positioning a Cyclops oracle as a step along the way of any adventure. Seasoned adventurers will have had their fair share of cryptic prophecies and words of woe delivered to them by mysterious fortune tellers and other such cryptic messengers, but seeking out an oracle said to reside in the mountains only to discover that they are a Cyclops could be a fun twist on the whole trope. Or maybe they even know they're looking for a Cyclops, and that's exactly why the ordeal is so dangerous. They not only have to find where the Cyclops live, but also convince them that they are worthy of seeing the Cyclopean oracle. Maybe they have to undergo some kind of test to prove themselves, or find an offering for the oracle suitable for the services rendered. And once they actually speak to them, what cryptic words might the seer have? Prophecy and a glimpse into the future can be a very powerful tool for a dungeon master if employed with a deft hand. And it's just cool as shit. There's also always the possibility that the Cyclops in the new book is not a replacement, but rather an inclusion in addition to the old. Maybe they're a different Cyclopean society, and your setting has both roving bands of god-hating brutish Cyclops who ravage the lands and only seem to be interested in serving their appetite, while conversely there's another group who acts in direct service to a god of fate or destiny, seeking to keep the threads of the multiverse on the right track. And while that would be a very easy fit into a setting like Theros, my beloved, the concepts of fate and destiny are very easily woven into pretty much any fantasy world. In the Forgotten Realms, maybe they're acting in service of Jurgle or Ion, both gods of fate in varying degrees. Depending on what god they're acting in service of, they could be anything from pious allies to heinous villains. And that touches on what I really love about these new changes. Cyclops have gone from a pretty nothing monster, just a big bag of hit points that swings hard, to a monster with a specific shtick that can be used for a specific role. I mean, sure, you can still use them as just big brutish beaters if that's what you need in your next encounter. But I know personally, going forward, anytime I'm considering delivering a prophecy or some kind of manifestation of cosmic forces to my players, I will always think of the Cyclops as a potential option to do that, and that's sick. Now, as I mentioned, this is a preview for everybody, so if you want to check out the brand new Cyclops stat block for yourself, maybe even use it in an upcoming game before the Monster Manual comes out, linked in the description down below is a one-page PDF document that has both stat blocks, the lore, literally it's just the page from the Monster Manual. We've got one page, and it's linked down below, free for everyone to use, courtesy of WotC. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about these changes. Do you like these changes? Do you dislike these changes for some reason? Do you have thoughts and opinions on how you would have liked to see them changed differently? Do you think we need books with more lore, or do you think I'm just a nerd who should go read a novel? Personally, this got my creative juices a-flowing, and I have so many ideas for how I want to use these monsters and kind of build on top of it. That's the one thing is where we don't know a ton about Cyclopean society as per the 5th edition update. For people like me who like world building, it at least does leave that gap for the Dungeon Master to kind of fill in what that society might actually look like. I'm already thinking of how I can incorporate last week's monster, the Crawling Head, with the Cyclops Seers and maybe some Eclipse Giants, or who knows. But all that said, most importantly, thank you so much for watching. I literally couldn't do this without you, and a massive shout out to all of my lovely patrons who help keep this show a-going, and a special shout out to this week's randomly selected Patron of the Week. Thank you so much to Eden Meyer for your support. It means the most. And as I said, thank you for watching. As always, if there is a monster from a previous edition of Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, another tabletop role-playing game, anything else that you can think of, I don't know, give me a cool TV show. Let me know in the comments down below. And you may just see it show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week, the show you're watching. You can also let me know in the Monster Suggestions channel on the Dungeon Dad Discord, which is also linked in the description down below. Or just go outside and yell it really loud and maybe I'll hear you. You don't know where I am. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Until then. All right, let's see here. Tell me everything there is to know about Dungeon Dad.